Hi everyone, my name is Julie. This is Keep Calm with Books and Coffee, and welcome to part of my August wrap-up. I don't know what part of my August wrap-up this is going to be, if it's going to be part 1 of 2 or more than that. Most of my concentration has been on the Amazing Readathon, which is based on The Amazing Race, because it has been a chaotic but very fun time. Anyway, I feel like I should jump into the books because I have so much to talk about. Last month I said I was going to try to start doing this in order of books that I like, how much I enjoyed the books, but I am not going to do that right now because I haven't gone through and given each of these ratings yet. So I'm going to kind of talk about my feelings about the books, and then I'll have my cards in between once I add everything to the reading sheet. I just kind of need to get my thoughts about some of these books out on video before I feel like I lose even more about them. And also, I'm overwhelmed thinking about filming all of these books. So some of this is going to be short, but we're going to jump into it. So the first book I have here is The Neighbor Favor by Kristina Forrest. And this was something I picked up fairly recently. I think I picked it up at the end of July when I went into my local bookstore and just kind of saw it. It sounded like a You've Got Mail, but with some publishing moments in there too. It sounded really cute. I was really excited for it. It's a romance set in New York City. We're following Lily, who works for a publisher but hasn't been able to kind of break through any of her she wants to work in children's publishing, but she's kind of stuck in her job, and she's reflecting on that, and then she starts emailing someone who is the author of her favorite children's book, and the two of them go back and forth for a while, and then he ghosts her. Meanwhile, we're also following the perspective of Nick, who is said author, and he has a pen name so his family can't find him, and he is enjoying emailing Lily, but then he gets spooked about actually telling her who he is and decides to cut off all communication. But they end up being neighbors and kind of coming at this from different sides. So they're attracted to one another, but then they are still dealing with the issues of being ghosted and being the ghoster and everything in between. I liked this book, but I didn't love it. It was very middle of the road for me because there were elements of it that, like I said, I enjoyed, but there was a lot of things that I didn't enjoy about it as well. I think I described this to a friend as the male love interest being too tortured hero, the female love interests family was too overbearing, and the sex was just too vanilla, too standard. So that for me was just kind of where it hit. It just certain things were too much or too little. The author, I think this is her first foray into adult. I believe she's written either middle grade or young adult, and I think that's kind of evident in the maturity level of her characters. And it was fine. There was nothing exceptionally wrong with this book. It hit the middle of the road for me, and I was a little bit disappointed by it because I thought it sounded really fun, really cute. And I think if the author got a little more experience under her belt, I would really enjoy her work because I liked the bones of the story and the idea of the story and kind of how she executed most of the plot. But the actual characters and kind of the characterization just wasn't for me. The next thing I read was The Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches by Sangu Mandanna, and this is a cozy paranormal fantasy modern day set story about Mika. It's Mika, who she is a witch, and she meets with her very secret society of irregular witches because in this world, witches are not supposed to gather. So she sees these witches occasionally, but she lives a pretty solitary life until she is contacted to try and train 3 young witches who need a mentor. So she goes to this house and it starts to meet these girls, teach them, as well as the other inhabitants of the house, who some trust her and some do not. So that kind of goes from there. I loved this book to absolute pieces. I loved it more than I loved other books that are in the similar vein, like House in the Cerulean Sea and even like Legends and Lattes, those like cozy vibes. I loved Legends and Lattes, but this one I loved even more, like absolutely adored it, loved every second of it. Want more immediately and want to reread this. But yeah, I read this in a day because it was our local bookstore's pick for their romance book club. I shoved it on a friend, and then we both shoved it on another friend, and then we went to book club and everyone also loved it. So it was just very like cozy, lovely read. There is some like, you know, there is plot there, so there are tense moments and everything, but there's a lot of laughs. It's like the romance is a subplot basically. The main plot is Mika kind of finding this family and teaching these girls. And I loved the discussions that we had in here, as well as like how the author decided to not have some discussions, and that was something we talked about in our book club, which I found really interesting. But overall, this was just like a warm hug of a book, and I absolutely loved it. Will be reading more. I want to explore more of the author's books, and this just was absolutely lovely. Like, I don't have anything to say except that I loved it to bits, and I will be reading more. I didn't realize what a roller coaster the first couple of weeks of my reading life was this month until like going through these in order that I read them. The next thing I read was Batman Catwoman by Tom King. This is like a spin-off of the current Batman comic that I am reading, which I believe starts with I Am Gotham and has run for a few years now. It's actually transitioned to new writers, but it starts with Tom King, and there's a subplot with Batman and Catwoman being involved. And this is like a spin-off of that, kind of set in 3 different timelines, looking at what we've already seen in the Tom King era, as well as Catwoman before, as well as Catwoman many years down the line after Bruce Wayne has passed away. So we're looking at all these different eras and exploring kind of Catwoman's look at herself to see like her moral compass and what she considers morally right and all of those things. And Catwoman is a very interesting character, so this was a very interesting exploration. I did find it a little overwhelming because I found it difficult to tell. I believe there were three timelines, but it was hard to tell sometimes which one we were in, and also when each of them was set. So for me, this was a little confusing. I did enjoy it a lot. I enjoyed this exploration, the discussion, and all of those things. Especially we have a concentration on Catwoman and the Joker's relationship, which was an interesting dynamic to explore. But overall, this was good, but a tad confusing for me. Next, I picked up Misrule by Heather Walter. This is the second in the Malice duology. At the end of the first book, in the first book, we're following a sapphic retelling of Sleeping Beauty, in which Maleficent, the Maleficent character, is Alice. She is what is called a dark grace, and she has these powers that no one else has. And they are darker and more misunderstood than the other graces that live in the kingdom. And she becomes friends with Aurora, the princess, as Aurora's curse comes closer to killing her. That's the basic synopsis of the first book, and in this we follow up the events of the first book, but 100 years later. Like, we kind of kick off the Sleeping Beauty myth in the first half of this duology, and then we pick it up here. And this is kind of the meat of what you think of as the Sleeping Beauty story kind of starts happening in this book, where, you know, someone's trying to wake her after a 100-year sleep. And I was so disappointed. I really didn't like this book at all. I didn't like where we went with Alice's story. What is her new name in this first book? In the second book, she picks up a new name, which I thought was unnecessary and confusing. There's a lot of weird stuff that happens in here for no reason. There's a different kind of world building in this book that I didn't enjoy. I was frustrated with the amount of deception and lying in the main couple's like story. I did not like the ending. So overall, this just wasn't my book, and I was so disappointed by it. And I'm really sad that I loved the first book so much, and this one was so bad. So I got interrupted for a few hours, and now we are back, and I will talk about Little Thieves by Margaret Owen. This is the story of Fanya, who was a young woman who was given over from her family to her godmothers, who are Death and Fortune. She has had these two magical, mystical gods of fairy godmothers, just godmothers for years now, and she is old enough that they are each asking her to serve them. Like their favor cannot be used anymore until she serves one of them. So Fanya has gone off on her own. She wants to make it on her own without their help, because she just wants to be loved by them and not be as servant to them. So she is in this situation where she has taken over someone's identity in order to be in a better position to steal wealth and get the finances she needs to get away from her godmothers so that she can be on her own. And she steals from the wrong family and angers a different god, and is punished by turning into gems within a fortnight if she doesn't give back everything she has stolen. That is the start of this story. It was absolutely a wild ride. So fun. I loved the discussions in here. I loved the way we talked about wealth and kind of family, as well as the different kind of just approaches to this fantasy trope. Like there was a lot of, even though there's magic in this world, Vanya was super clever. She was so clever, and she kept coming up with interesting ways to do this. She explained to us how she's been getting away with this ruse for like a year now, and there was also so much of this book was written in a way that it really brought my emotions into the forefront. Like I felt like sometimes you read a book and you are invested, but you don't necessarily feel everything 110% the way the characters do, or the way you do in other books. I felt the fear, I felt the anxiety, I felt the joy, I felt the like feelings throughout this book. I just loved it to bits, and I can't wait to read the sequel. I can't wait to reread this. I would probably have more complex thoughts about this, but I read it during this month where I kind of flew through a lot of books, and the ones that I enjoyed and I'm going to keep reading in the series, I think I'm going to have to reread at some point, because even though I read them and flew through them and enjoyed them and comprehended them, I don't think all the details are going to stick in my brain because I was reading them so quickly for the readathon. So on to the next. Next is By the Book by Jasmine Guillory. This is the second in the Meant to Be series. Each one of these is a fairy tale retelling written by a different author, like a modern day adaptation. This one is Beauty and the Beast, and this we are following Isabel and Bo. So Isabel is a young woman working in publishing who hasn't been able to move up the ranks. She's kind of been working as an admin assistant for an editor sort of for a couple of years now. She hasn't made any progress. She's really burnt out. She's also tired of being one of the only Black women in her publishing space, so she's been kind of frustrated by that, and she gets the opportunity through a series of events to go talk to Bo Towers, who is a man who's been sort of a recluse. He signed a deal for a memoir and hasn't turned anything in for it. He's like super late on his book. So Izzy's boss sends her to talk to Bo. She ends up staying in his like secluded mansion, and the two of them hit it off and also work on his memoir. If this sounds like another book that I have recently talked about, it does sound very similar to The Neighbor Favor, and I wish I hadn't read them so close together, because now I basically have them confused and muddled together. That's why the description of this was so hard for me to get through, because they're very similar stories with the, kind of reclusive hero and the female lead working in publishing and being frustrated with her job, not being able to move up, and wondering if that's because of her her skill or her race or something else that's going on in the office. So I wish I just hadn't read these in the same month, because I feel like I'm comparing them so much, just out of the fact that I read them like a couple of weeks apart. But I didn't even realize how similar they were until I was like pretty deep into this book. I enjoyed by the book. It's going to end up also kind of being a middle of the road book pick for me, but this one didn't have as many obvious problems. It just was sort of middling for me, like a 3-star probably when I put it through the spreadsheet. This just didn't satisfy me because I felt some of it just felt unfinished, kind of left open-ended. I also felt like the ending of this was kind of rushed. Like I didn't really believe, like after the like 3rd act breakup, I didn't really believe why they came back together. It just felt kind of vague and rushed. So different books, different problems, but yeah, also kind of middling. So I'll show you a rating here in a second. Then we got into Face Off Weekend, which was about halfway through the month, and this was where Brianna had a spinner wheel set up that you would spin it and it would select a country from Europe, and you had to read a book with the colors of that cover, colors of that flag on the cover. So these next few things are going to be from that, and I'm going to kind of go through these pretty quickly because a lot of them were short or rereads or whatever. So the first one I got was, I believe, France, and I read Alanna the First Adventure, Song of the Lioness by Tamora Pierce. This was also a host favorite, so it got me like other points, and this was a reread for me after many years. I want to reread more of Tamora Pierce's books. This is a middle grade series that follows Alanna. She and her brother are being sent off to like school, and her brother doesn't want to be a knight. Alanna does, so Alanna takes her brother's place at the night school at the castle and secretly hides her gender and tries to become a knight as a boy. She lives as a boy for several years. And this is like the first part of that adventure. This series is older. I think it was published in the 90s, and it has some problematic elements in it, especially regarding race and kind of the white savior trope and stuff like that. That a lot of that is later in the series, but also in this book too. So there's a lot of issues there, and I have seen growth in Tamora Pierce's writing over the years that I think she realizes this now, but this is her first series. So there's issues here that were even more obvious to me as an adult rereading this, but I still enjoy this series and I have a lot of nostalgia for it. So I do love this, but just be aware going in, like if you would read this now without any nostalgia for it, there is some big issues here. I also reread Heartstopper Volume 1. I don't remember what the flag spins were. I have it in my Google sheet, but I don't remember what they were. But again, Heartstopper reread, super cute, super fun. I adore Heartstopper. I basically give all of these volumes 5 stars because they give me all the feelings, and that is one of the big, like with graphic novels especially, or short works, like if they give me the feelings, that's what my rating is based on, unless they do something egregious. But yeah, Heartstopper, loved so much, reread of that. Next, I read The Black Mage Volume 1 by Daniel Barnes and DJ Kirkland. This is a graphic novel about Tom Token, who is the first Black student to be admitted to this historically white magical school. If you combined like Harry Potter and Final Fantasy and threw in some deep historical racism as well as historical figures and ghosts, you would get some of this book. This is kind of a mashup, a lot of things. This was really interesting. I thought it subverted a lot of tropes. It also has some great discussions in here. For a graphic novel, it covers a lot of ground and does a lot of kind of calling out of racism and also kind of tokenism, Tom Token being the biggest example. But this was really interesting. I thought the art style was really cool. I liked it a lot. It also talks about the Klan and some of the historical racism and historical actions and how those things were carried through to the present. So it also breaks down some of that. Like I said, it does a lot of work in 144 pages for a graphic novel. It does a lot of heavy lifting, and I really enjoyed this. And I think this is the only volume that is out of this graphic novel. I tried to look into that, but I would be interested to see where we go from here, because it was just one volume and it seems like there could be more of the story. So we'll see. So I said I couldn't remember the flags, but I remember that the Black Mage fit for Portugal, which had 5 colors in the flag, and that was one of the difficult ones. And then I spun Portugal again and ended up choosing the Batman and Scooby-Doo Crossover Mysteries Volume 1. This was a random thing I found on Hoopla. I was actually in the car on the way to a girls' weekend. Like, I was in the back seat and I was just looking for something easy to read, and this was very easy and very silly and very fun, and I enjoyed it to bits. Basically, Scooby-Doo, the gang of all of them, are crossing over with Batman. So we have the Mystery Machine, and we also have Batman and his dog. It was like 5 stories of hilarity and just silliness that I just felt was a great, like, 2-hour car ride read, and I had a ton of fun with it. I think there's another volume, so I will probably pick that up at some point, but I just really enjoyed this because it was silly and fun and lighthearted after I'd been reading some like more challenging stuff. Then I moved on to The Crown of Ptolemy by Riordan. This is the 3rd in the Percy Jackson and Kane Chronicles crossover. I read the second one. I think I had only read the first and second one. I don't think I ever read the third one because I don't remember the resolution at all. So I was reading this as well on that weekend and really enjoyed it. It was a pretty quick read. Yeah, it's only 63 pages. This was just a nice little resolution to everything. I really enjoyed the way Rick Riordan he had this very well developed magic system for both series. Like, both series has complex, interesting characters as well as like very interesting magic systems that like kind of you delve into over the course of the books, but they're very different. Like, they're the way the characters tap into their powers and tap into their magic works very differently, and seeing that combined in this series and how they worked together was very interesting. I also just love Percy, and this was from his perspective for the most part, so it was a fun little like glimpse back at him. And then the last thing that I read for Face Off Weekend was Nick and Charlie, which is by Alice Oseman, which is a novella length about Nick and Charlie. And I believe this is at the end of Nick's senior year, so I think it's deeper into the Heartstopper series than what we've gone through in the actual like Heartstopper comics. And they are facing the fact that Nick is graduating and that Charlie is having a hard time with that, and that they've been together every day for the whole of their relationship, and now they have to kind of face the fact that they are gonna not be together every day. So it was like a 2-hour audiobook. It made me very emotional. I enjoyed it a lot. And yeah, so that's I don't have a lot to say about it because it felt I thought Osman did a great job of she is a graphic novelist, but she's also a novelist, so there wasn't any problems I think with the characterization switching over. Anyway, we're gonna stop here. That is the end of my thoughts for the first half-ish of the month. So I was gonna make 2 parts to this wrap up, but I kind of just decided let's just make it big. So we're gonna continue on. I was gonna stop, but like, why stop? Just keep going. Next, on the other end of the spectrum, I read Neon Gods by Katee Robert, which is the first in the Dark Olympus series. This is a modernized retelling of Hades and Persephone. We basically find ourselves in the city of Olympus, and the like pantheon of gods is a title that you inherit over time. Either, I think some of the titles are hereditary, like passed from family member to family member, while others are like taken on by new people. by defeating the old one or earning the title, stuff like that. Persephone finds herself engaged to Zeus, which she is not interested in because several of the other heroes have perished under mysterious circumstances. So she runs away and ends up running to a part of the city she's not familiar with, directly into the territory of Hades. So the two of them make a bargain that if Persephone is ruined, then Zeus would want nothing to do with her, and Hades is willing to take this on to piss off Zeus. Then they discover some feelings for one another, and it kind of goes from there. This is a dark and steamy, very interesting roller coaster ride. I enjoyed this for the characters and for like the sort of bits and pieces of Greek mythology that are included. You know, there's lots of nods to different things. I have found in the past that I like Katee Roberts' novellas like so-so. Like, I am just kind of a middling fan of her novellas, but I really enjoyed this and had a fun time with it. So I'm gonna plan on reading more of her novels and definitely more of this series, but for me, her works so far have worked better as novels. Like, I was a big fan of this, and I haven't been a huge fan of her novellas, so that was interesting to me. This was super spicy, which I had heard previously, and I tried to read this on a vacation with some friends, and I decided to put it down and read it later. I was having a little bit of a hard time in public, but not in like a bad way. Like, I enjoyed this and it was fun. I just wasn't expecting it to be quite as spicy as it was, despite all of the like evidence and reviews that I had read. So I had a good time with this, really enjoyed it. We'll be reading more. Next up, I read Persuasion by Jane Austen. This is the story of Anne Elliot, who is a young aristocratic woman in England in the 1800s who is intending to marry Frederick Wentworth. She meets him, falls in love, the two of them get engaged, and then her family persuades her against the engagement. And then we are 8 years down the line where Anne is still unmarried and Frederick Wentworth has come back to the country where Anne lives in order to he's on the hunt for a wife because it's 8 years later and he has made his fortune in the Navy, and the two of them meet again under very different circumstances. I adore this book. I love it to bits. It's my favorite book of all time. I say that a lot when I reread it. I listened to the audiobook, and I have found an audiobook that I really enjoyed this time. A lot of times I don't love the audiobook narration, but this one was very well done. And I absolutely adore this book. I don't have anything new to say about it. I find myself resonating with Anne very much. I love the arc of this story and how if you're going to read this story, you have to be prepared to be very patient, because the first half to 2/3 is pretty slow and a lot of like building up to the revelations of the last third, but I really adore it and I love these characters very, very much. So no new thoughts. Still love Persuasion. I also read Cryptid Club by Sarah Anderson, which is a collection of fun little web comics that Anderson had put together. I think she had these online previously, but then she put them all into one book, and I had been wanting to read them all because I follow her Instagram. Sarah Anderson is also the artist that does the Adulthood is the Myth collections, and I absolutely love those. So when she started doing Cryptid Club, I also loved it because I am very interested in cryptids and I think they're fun. So this was a cute, whimsical way to also enjoy that. And I started really enjoying these when she would put them on her Instagram, and now they were all collected in one place. So I read this and really enjoyed it. It's super cute. It's just a fun, fluffy read with little comics. So not a lot to say here. Then I listened to A Curious Beginning by Deanna Raybourn. This is the first in the Veronica Speedwell series. In this, we are following Veronica Speedwell, who is a young woman whose guardians have recently passed away. She is trying to figure out where she's going to go next in her life, and someone tries to kidnap her, and another stranger offers to help her with this problem, says he knew her mother, and Veronica never knew her mother. The two of them go to London, where this rescuer is then murdered after leaving her in the care of a third stranger. Veronica intends to kind of just keep going with her life, but her new stranger friend, Stoker, convinces her that, maybe someone is after you if you almost got kidnapped and then the person who rescued you got murdered. Like, maybe we should try to figure out what's going on here. So the two of them kind of embark on that journey together. I really enjoyed this. It definitely had some things that I had issues with, such as like, I think the historical language was taken a little too far at times. Like, I think we could have toned down some of the things that were kind of used colloquially at the time. Like, we could have eliminated some of those for our modern day sensibilities. I think also Veronica is a little overwritten as a like strong-willed female character. Like, she's a little too strong-willed at times, that just like kind of got on my nerves. But overall, I liked this, and I will be continuing on with the series. It was very much in my wheelhouse and had a lot of things that I enjoyed about it. So fun. I will be continuing with the audiobooks too, because they were well done. And I had a DNF of Seep, and I forget who the author is on this, so I will have the cover here. This was a sci-fi, futuristic, kind of dystopian story where aliens had invaded, but they invade in a way that makes it seem like everything is better. Like, they give humans a lot of technology and kind of take away some of the issues of today's world. But is it better? Is the kind of the question that this book is asking and kind of explores. And I just found it a little too, I couldn't jive with the writing style. It was a little too sci-fi for me. Like, I felt like I was not grasping the question. Like, at first I was understanding the sort of like satire of it and the sort of exploration, but then it started to get into some things that I was like, am I not getting the point? So I decided to DNF it because I wasn't enjoying it very much. Then I reread Sabriel by Garth Nix. I listened to this on audiobook and I didn't feel like digging out my copy that's up there, so just so you know, I will have the cover here. But this follows Sabriel, who is a young woman who is graduating what we would probably call high school, and she is getting ready to go back, possibly go to college. She's kind of exploring her options, but she is going to school in Excelsior, which is sort of set in the mid 20th century, somewhere between the World War I and World War II is what it feels like to me. In this, Sabriel receives a messenger from her father, who is the Aporson, and he works in the Old Kingdom, which is actually where Sabriel is from. This place is much more mysterious than Excelsior. It has magic and mystery, and has sort of had a crumbling government and structure to it for 100 years or so. It's getting more and more dangerous by the day, and Sabriel's father is working against the dark forces that live in the Old Kingdom, and he has been trapped by one and is calling for Sabriel's help. She leaves her school, goes into the Old Kingdom, and starts on an adventure to try and save her father. I love this series. The audiobooks are read by Tim Curry, and they are excellent audiobooks. These are the first audiobooks I ever experienced, and I loved them to bits. I still really love re-listening to these, and I cry every single time at the end of this book. Like, it just wells up in me every time. It's so emotional at the end. I love this series. I love the world building. It's so fascinating. I think it's a really unique take on like zombie creatures, and I continue to want to reread this all the time. So this fit in with something that I was reading for the Amazing Readathon. I don't remember what, and I just felt like rereading this, and it worked out perfectly. So anyway, love this. Love it to bits. Continue to love it. Continue on. The next book I read was Next Year in Havana, and this was actually a DNF for me. I decided to give up on this. I think I hit the 50% mark because I was trying to read it for a Amazing Readathon prompt, and I DNF'd it. In this, we are following dual timelines of a young woman escaping the Cuban Revolution and the romance that she has with a revolutionary before she escapes, as well as her granddaughter who goes back to the island several years later, like probably 50 or 60 years later, and the granddaughter goes to explore Cuba, as well as her grandmother's like life that she used to have, because she grew up on all these stories of Cuba. And for me, this was interesting. I thought there was nothing exceptionally wrong with this book. It didn't do anything egregious to make me hate it. It just wasn't a book for me, because I felt like the parallels were too parallel. Like, there were things that were happening in both timelines that I was like, this is just the same thing happening. And I expected it to be different than it was, and I just wasn't enjoying it, so I decided to give up on it. Like I said, it's nothing terrible. I think a lot of people do enjoy this book, but there's a lot of politics in it, which I was actually really interested in, but it felt very surface level, like I wanted a deeper exploration of it. So that's why I'm going to read a nonfiction about Cuba eventually, but this book just was not working for me, so I decided to give up. Then I reread Lore Olympus volumes 1 and 2. These are some of my favorite graphic novels. I reread Heartstopper and Lore Olympus this month, which was excellent and very fun. In this, we are following Persephone, who is a young 19-year-old goddess in training, and she goes to Olympus for the first time, both to kind of explore and go to college, but also to kind of get away from her mom. So she meets Hades on one of her first days there, and the two of them have a interest in one another, and as she meets other gods and goddesses, Persephone's life gets more and more complicated. It's a fun graphic novel. However, there are some dark parts to this as well, so I definitely recommend checking out the trigger warnings. The first pages of this graphic novel do have some warnings on them as well as far as triggers, so definitely something to check out. But I really, really love these. I cannot wait for more to come out, and I'm really, really enjoying the Barnes & Noble editions of these as they come out, so I'm gonna keep going with those. One more DNF for this month, and it was The Thursday Murder Club by Richard Osman. This is the story of a local, like, English retirement home that examines old murders and tries to figure them out. And one day there is a murder in their community, and they decide to get involved to try to figure out what happened. I didn't like this. I started reading this and it seemed interesting, but I found all of the members of the Thursday Murder Club really annoying as characters, and I didn't have any interest in reading about them. And then I thought I would try to get to the murder because I thought a certain person was going to get murdered, and that wasn't the person that got murdered. And I didn't want to read about this other person for several hundred pages. So I just decided to give up on this. I don't think murder mysteries are maybe for me, or at least they're ones that I'm going to have to like borrow from the library and try, but this just wasn't for me. I didn't like the characters. I didn't like the writing. I wasn't interested in who died. So yeah. Then I listened to The Witches of Lichford by Paul Cornell. This is the story of a community who is it's a small community who is currently having a debate about whether or not a large supermarket store should end up in the community. They're kind of on a vote for this to figure out, do we want to let this come into our city or not? And they have determined that this big box store is going to interfere with traffic, so they're going to reroute some things. And the local witches realize that if they mess with this intersection, if they mess with the footprint of the town, then maybe a door to some evil is going to open. So they have to figure out how to work the vote in order to keep the demons, dark forces out of their city. This was really, I want to say cute, but I don't mean cute. I liked this because the characters were interesting, the premise was interesting, and I liked how there was this spooky, it was just spooky enough to be interesting and keep me reading. I did find it a little short. Like, I would have liked a few more things to be a little more developed in it, because I had a lot of questions at the end about the characters and kind of what we get vague introductions to these characters and they work together, but there's still a lot of questions, and I feel like we could have worked some of the answers in. But overall, I liked this. I will probably continue on to the next one at some point, and I just found it like clever and interesting. The last thing I read in August was Gideon the Ninth by Tamsin Muir. This is the first in the Locked Tomb series. In this, we're following Gideon, who is a part of the Ninth House. She has grown up with unfriendly necromancers all around her, and she is summoned to she and Harrow, who is the head of the Ninth House, they are summoned to a gathering of the houses, and at this gathering of the houses, they are going to figure out how to become servants of the Emperor. That is as simple as I can make this. And it is a really interesting story. I was so hesitant to read this for so long because there is so much like buzz around these books about being confused and it being a like weird sapphic necromancers in space and all of that stuff. And I think it is confusing at times. Like, I had a hard time understanding what the larger plot of the series is and the larger scope of the books, but I think you kind of have to almost look at this as dark academia and a mystery to kind of grasp what's going on. If you're trying to figure out what each scene means and like what each thing Gideon does is, I think you're just gonna get frustrated. But as I listened to this, I was just kind of going along with the story and kind of figuring that Gideon wasn't going to be the one to figure everything out. Like, she was trying, but I didn't always think that she was going to be the one to like solve all the mysteries. So I kind of went with that, and I found that it was a very good book. I really enjoyed this. I'm actually rereading it right now because I would like to. I don't have a copy of Harrow right now, and I want to keep everything fresh in my brain, so I think one of my next purchases is going to be Harrow the Ninth. But until then, I decided to just re-listen to the audiobook and kind of gather more information, because what I did was I immersion read this, so I listened to the audiobook and read it at the same time, and that worked really well for me. So that's my thoughts on Gideon the Ninth. 5 stars, absolutely loved it to bits. Can't wait to read Harrow. And yes, I was confused, but I managed to just go with it and it was fine. But I don't know if that's what other people did and still found it frustrating, but maybe I don't know. I really enjoyed this. I haven't read anything this unique and interesting in a long time. It's a weird mashup of things. Like Gideon is very sarcastic and it feels like sci-fi in the like futuristic, like we've moved past our current times, but it's also fantasy in that there's necromancy and magic and darkness and like what feels like paranormal creatures. So yeah, it very well fit the prompt of a genre mashup, and I just this might ended up on my favorite books of the year because I just loved it so much. But that's everything that I read in the month of August. Truly this time there will be no more adding on to this video. I think I stopped it twice, once when I got interrupted and once when I was like, I'm not going to film anymore. Now I'm filming more. Anyway, if you made it to the end of this video, thank you so much for watching. I'd love to hear your thoughts on any of the books that I talked about today. And if you don't feel like chatting, please leave me a bone emoji below, just cause. But yeah, thank you so much for watching. If you want to see me again, go ahead and hit that subscribe button, and I will see you next time. Bye!